عليك يا رسول الله وعلى آل بيتك الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة قريب يا مظلوم كربلاء سيدي يا أبا عبد الله لأندبنك يا صباحا ومساء ولأبكين عليك بدل الدموع دمع على القاسم العريس أم المكارم أشاعت بيوم العرس نشر المآتم لقد جمعت فيه العجائب كلها كما جمعت فيه دواهي العظائم به القاسم المغوار أبدي شجاعة به القاسم المغوار أبدى شجاعة من المرتضى الكرار يوم الملاحم فكم زف قرما لا يطاق لقبره وكم رد جيشا لا يرد لهازمه فقرت به عين المعالي كما بكيت عليه بدمع من دم القلب ساجمه ولم أنسه لما هوى بعد أن هويت ببطشته الكبرى طمات الضياغني تقاسمه الأوغاد خوف مراسه بنبل وأحجار وسمر لهاذم فما هو إلا البدر قبل تمامه عراه خسوف من شموس الصوارم ينادي أيا عماه أودعتك الذي إليه مصير الخلق يا خير عاصم وعز عليه أن يراه مقطرا عليه برود من دماء سواجم قوم يا زينب ساعديني عالرزية جاسم وقع من رجعت يمن ردتك ظفر عن جار الأيام، ليش قطعت بي ونسيت أمك يا جسايا، هيهات من غمضت عينك عيني تنام، والله العود هالسهر غصبا علي، يا وحدي يا ما ردت غيرك بدنياي، لا تظن غير الموت يطفي جمرة حشاي، هيهات أطفي سعيرها بدموع عيناي، لكني جفت دمعتي كانت جرية، إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. سيدي يا أبا عبد الله، يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، ما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Please enlighten this majlis with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When it comes to gaining our religious knowledge, there is no dispute between the Muslims in all their sects that the main source is the Holy Quran. And then our other source is, of course, with no dispute, is the Sunnah of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For his sayings, his actions, the things that he agreed upon are all sources for things for us to take our religion from. There is no dispute in regard to this. However, there is a lot of accusations against the Shia school of thought that they don't care that much about regulating their narrations, the sources from which they get their narrations, the sources from which they gather their narrations. A lot of claims and accusations that the Shia do not take strict measurements when dealing with their narrations, to the point that they say that the Shia does not have a book that they call Sahih, like other schools of thought have. They don't have a Sahih book that they can all agree upon, the same way that the other schools of thought have. In fact, even within the Shia school of thought, we found certain scholars or certain people who study in the seminary that claim that we are not that strict when we deal with the narrations, to the point that most of Al-Kafi and Man La Yahdar wal-Faqih and so on, which are the main Shia sources, are weak sources and narrations. In today's lecture, I want to answer the main question of today's lecture, which is why don't we as Shia have a Sahih book in the first place? But to answer this question, we need to understand, number one, what did the act of noting down the narrations start? What is the history of writing down the narrations and the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? This is the first thing. The second thing, I want to discuss the efforts of the Shia and the followers of Ahlul Bayt in filtering out the narrations and making sure that the correct narrations reached to us throughout history, from the time of the A'immah up until today. If we understand these 2 points, then we can go and answer the question of, do we need a Sahih book in the first place? If yes, if no, then why we as Shia do not have a book that we call Sahih? So, before going into the first point, there is an important point to keep in mind. And this point is a message to the Muslims in general and to the Shia specifically, who think that our narrations are weak, or our books, our main sources are weak sources. If we all believe that the Quran is a main source for our religion, and the Sunnah of the Prophet, the narrations of the Prophet, is also another source for my religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, promised to protect the Quran. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We are the ones who descended or brought down the Quran, and we are the ones that protect it. So Allah promised in the Holy Quran that He will protect the Quran and will maintain it as it is. What about the narrations? Of course, we can't say that the narrations are a source for me to gain my religion if most of them I think of them as weak, and if most of them I think they are not valid evidences. So in general, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects the message. However, the discussion that we're having is in regards to the tool and the methodologies of how the narrations were filtered out, because there is no doubt that many narrations were fabricated throughout history. So let's begin with our first point, which is, how did narrating or noting down the hadith start? When did the Muslims actually need to note down the hadith? So after the Prophet passed away, which was in the year of 11th of Hijrah, after Hijrah, during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar, because many people were narrating different sorts of narrations, so to make sure that there is order and it's not chaotic and different opinions are said, they forbade writing down the narrations. They said, Quran is our main source, it will be our main judge, and writing down narrations is not an acceptable thing. So we had a good period after the Prophet where there was no writing down of narrations, because it was a forbidden act by the rulers. Afterwards, when it comes to other schools of thought, since for them the source of narrations has stopped by the passing away of the Prophet. They have no more sources of narrations except the Prophet himself. So the sources of the narrations has stopped. Then there was a period where there is no writing down of narrations, no writing reports of what the Prophet said. Then they realized that they need to start to write down narrations, because people started making up stories about the Prophet, and we need to start filtering things out. Which is the main reason why we see that other schools of thought started the hadith sciences before us, because they needed to filter out their narrations before we do so. Why is it the case? Because when it comes to the Shi'i Ithna Ashari, the 12er Shi'ism, our main source is the Prophet, of course. But we also believe that the message of the Prophet continues on and gets passed on Imam after an Imam. So whatever Imam Ali says is the teachings of the Prophet. And whatever Imam Al-Hassan and Hussain say is the teaching of the Prophet, and Imam Ali passed it down to them. Whatever Imam Al-Sajjad say, it's passed down by Imam Al-Hussain, so on and so forth. So we believe that the time frame that we have to take down narrations was much longer for us than other schools of thought. In fact, for us, writing down the narrations continued up until the Ghaib al-Kubra. When Ghaib al-Kubra started, where there is no more direct contact with the Ma'soom, with the Imam. So when was this? The year 329 after Hijrah. So for other schools of thought, the time of the narrations of Rasulullah, of the words of Rasulullah, has stopped in the year of 11th of after Hijrah. For us, it stopped at the year 329 after Hijrah. So there's a big difference, big gap. And it's important to say that when Imam al-Sadiq gives me a narration, it is passed down to him from the previous Imams, which is essentially the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if any Imam gives me a certain narration, it's as if Rasulullah is giving me that narration. This is very important to keep in mind. So now let's do a quick comparison between the main book of narrations within the other school of thought and the main book of narrations for our school of thought. The main book of narrations, we all know it, it's famous, Saheeh al-Bukhari. When was al-Bukhari born? Any ideas? It was in the year 256 after Hijrah. So we said the Prophet passed away the year 11. And for them, there is no more source of giving out narrations. By the passing of the Prophet, the time of giving out narrations has stopped. So from the year 11 up until year 256 when Al-Bukhari was born, this is the year he was born, not the year he wrote down his book. So more than 200 years. Major gap. Of course, there was writing down of narrations before Al-Bukhari. But to reach to this conclusion that this is the main book, the most authentic book after the Quran, as they call it, 200-year gap between the time of the Nas, the time of the narrations of Rasulullah, and the time of writing down of Sahih al-Bukhari. As for Al-Kafi, which is our main book, when was Al-Kafi written? Al-Shaykh al-Kulayni was born in the year 260 of Hijrah, after Hijrah, which is 4 years. He was born in the year 300 and he died in the year 329. Al-Kulayni, he died in the year 329. When did Al-Ghayb al-Kubra start? 329 after Hijrah. So Al-Kulayni lived his life in the period of Al-Ghayb al-Sughra, a period where there is a contact with the Imam through his ambassadors. So for us, Al-Kafi is written in a time where there is some form of communication with the Imam. So when we measure it this way, Al-Kafi was written much closer to the time of the narrations than Sahih al-Bukhari. This is something to keep in mind. This is the main thing I wanted to start with. Then let us look at what are the efforts of the Imamis, of the Shia, the Ithna Asharis, in filtering out the narrations. For fabricating narrations is a reality that no one denies. The Sunnis don't deny it, the Shia don't deny it. We all are aware that there are narrations that are fabricated. How can we filter them out? To see the efforts of the Shia in filtering out the narrations, we need to divide the efforts of the Shi'ism into 3 phases. The first phase is during the time of the Imams. We see the Imams themselves giving us indications, giving us points on how we filter the ahadith, because they emphasize the idea of writing down the narrations for them not to get lost. We see, for example, one of the ways the Imam would be naming individuals to take narrations from. Someone would come to Imam al-Rida and he would tell him, "Oh my master, it is hard for me to reach to you every time. Who should I take my religion from?" Imam al-Rida would tell him, "Take it from Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman." So he gave him a name of one of the companions. So now when I have a narration narrated by Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, I know this is an authentic narration. On the contrary, on the other side, we see that the Imam gives us names of those who we should not take our narration from. Imam al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, would say that we are the truthful ones. In one of the narrations, he said, Inna sadiqun, we are the truthful ones. Every one of us had people who lie against us. The Prophet salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi had Musaylam al-Kadhab, lying against him, fabricating narrations against him. Imam Ali Amir Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi had Abdullah bin Saba, fabricating narrations against him. Then he kept listing until he reached his time, and he said, in my time, those who fabricate the narrations, those who are liars are, and he listed a list of people who we should not take the narrations from. So we see the Imam in his time, he's filtering out. Take from this person, don't take from that person. This person is truthful, he's trustworthy, this person is a liar. So this is the first thing. In the time of the Imam is giving us names, naming the individuals. This is one way. Another way we find the Imam used to correct some of the narrations. And we have such few of these incidents. Someone would come to Imam al-Sadiq and he would show him a narration by Imam Ali alayhi salam. The narration said, Imam Ali would say, if you are forced to curse me, then curse me. But if you are forced to disassociate with me, do not disassociate with me. He showed this narration to Imam al-Sadiq. He said, did Imam Ali say this? Imam al-Sadiq said, the first part he said, if you are forced to curse me, if someone had the gun on you and said, curse Ali, to save yourself, you can curse me. The second part, however, Imam al-Sadiq said, the wording is different. He said, Amir Mu'mineen said, if you are forced to disassociate with me, then know that I am on the path of Rasulullah. This was the continuation of this narration. So the Imam corrected a certain narration, and we find this incident in few other narrations, where the Imam would correct the wording of narrations mentioned by Amir Mu'mineen or narrations mentioned by the earlier Imams. So this is another way where we see the filtration and the correction of narrations in the time of the A'imma. Another way is people used to come to the Imam and ask him about a certain book or a certain group of people. For example, we have the same Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, we mentioned him earlier. He had a book where he wrote down narrations. So this book reached to Imam al-Askari. Somebody would show it to Imam al-Askari, this book of Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman. The person asks Imam al-Askari, so few Imams, few generations later, from Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, can I take narrations from this book? The Imam would then praise Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman and say, yes, you can take from this book. Another example, there is a tribe by the name of Banu Faddal. Banu Faddal were companions of the Imams up until Imam al-Sadiq. After Imam al-Sadiq, some historical accounts show that they deviated. They didn't follow Imam al-Kadhim, they followed the brother of Imam al-Kadhim, not Ismail, another one. That group was known as Fatahiyya. This group does no longer exist. They do not have followers nowadays. But back then, they did have. So Banu Faddal is known historically to have shifted to Fatahiyya. But they were the friends of so many Imams. So the companions were baffled. Should we take their narrations or should we leave it? We have so many narrations from Bani Faddal. So they came to the Imam. They asked him, what about Bani Faddal? Should we take their narrations or should we leave it? The Imam would then say, خُذُوا مَا رَوَوْا وَذَرُوا مَا رَأَوْا. Meaning, take what they have narrated about us and leave the opinions that they give. When they give their own opinion, leave it. When they narrate, they say, قَالَ الصَّادِقُ, take it. The Imam say they do not lie, but they may give their own opinions. So don't take their opinions, but take their narrations. So see, the Imam is also telling us what to do with certain types of individuals, certain types of tribes. So in the time of the Imam, we have so many incidents like that. So this is the beginning of us trying to filter out the narrations and protect the correct ones, the authentic ones, in the time of the Imam. This is the first phase. The second phase of the efforts of the Ithna Ashariya, of the 12 Shi'ism, in protecting hadith, is in the period of Ghaybat al-Sughra. Ghaybat al-Sughra, when Imam al-Mahdi went into his first occultation, there was some form of communication with the Imam through his ambassadors. He had 4 ambassadors. So the ambassadors would do similar job to what the Imams used to do. If there is a liar who's spreading out narrations, the ambassadors would warn people against him. They would say, do not take from him. If there is a certain book that fabricates the narrations of the Imams, the ambassadors would say, do not take from this book. I'll give you one story. In the time of Ghaybat al-Sughra, there was a person by the name of Ash-Shalmaghani. Ash-Shalmaghani was a companion of Imam al-Hadi. Then he was the companion of Imam al-Askari. Then he was the companion of the first ambassador of Imam al-Mahdi ajallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif. Then when the first ambassador passed away, this person, seeing himself, he has knowledge, he's been a companion of 2 Imams and the first Safir, he thought that the Imam would choose him to be the second Safir, the second ambassador. But the Imam chose the son of the first ambassador to be the second ambassador. This person, Ash-Shalmaghani, did not accept the idea that he was not chosen to be the second ambassador. So he started claiming that the Imam appointed him to be the second ambassador. Now people think nowadays we have people who claim to be Maraja. Back in the day, they used to claim to be the ambassadors of the Imam. It was much worse. So he claimed to be the ambassador of the Imam and started narrating things from his own. Slowly, he claimed to be the Imam himself, Ash-Shalmaghani, until the point that Imam al-Mahdi would write a letter to the ambassador to curse Al-Shalmaghani, cursing Al-Shalmaghani. So Al-Shalmaghani went from being a companion of 2 Imams to then being cursed by Imam al-Mahdi. And this is a lesson to learn. Sometimes our ego makes us forget who we truly are. So the ambassadors of Imam al-Mahdi ajallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif would warn people against this person, Ash-Shalmaghani. They would curse him in public, make sure people don't take narrations from him. So this is one example in the time of the minor occultation where the ambassadors made sure to filter out the narrations and make sure we get the authentic ones and keep them with us. Then, during the end of Ghaybat al-Sughra, we have our first and our major source of hadith written, the main one that has reached to us. Some of them have not reached to us, which is Al-Kafi by Shaykh al-Kulayni. This was written towards the end of the minor occultation. So Shaykh al-Kulayni was a great man. He's highly praised in historical accounts, and he wrote this book with the ability to sometimes check with the ambassador of the Imam, the final ambassador. So this is how close we are to the time of the Imam. After Al-Shaykh al-Kulayni came Al-Shaykh al-Mufid, which is, if you want to use modern terms, he was the first marja after at the beginning of the major occultation, Shaykh al-Mufid. Shaykh al-Mufid, same thing. He used his knowledge, he tried his best to filter out the narrations that are fabricated and keep the authentic ones. So we have the effort of the Kulayni, effort of the Mufid, After Shaykh al-Mufid came Shaykh al-Saduq, who wrote من لا يحضره الفقيه. Sorry, Shaykh al-Saduq is before Shaykh al-Mufid. He wrote من لا يحضره الفقيه, where again he did the same process where he filtered out the narrations and he wrote to us one of our main sources, which is من لا يحضره الفقيه. So now we have Shaykh al-Kulaini, Shaykh al-Saduq, Shaykh al-Mufid. After that came Shaykh al-Tusi. Again, same effort of filtering out the narrations and making sure the authentic ones are the ones that we use. And he wrote to us two main sources, which is Al-Tahdhib and Al-Istibsar. Shaykh al-Tusi is the one who started the Islamic seminary, the House of Najaf, almost 1,000 years ago. And from Shaykh al-Tusi time up until today, we've had generations of scholars up until Sayyid al-Kha'i, where he wrote to us an encyclopedia about the status of every individual mentioned in the narrations. So you know how when we narrate, we say, Fulan, this person narrated from that person, who narrated from the third, who narrated from the Imam. Sayyid al-Kha'i brought every name of these names. He wrote, what is the state of that person? Is he trustworthy? Is he not trustworthy? He looked into history and tried to see the status of every single individual of those who are mentioned in the narrations. And he wrote his famous encyclopedia, Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith. So the efforts of our ulama has been going from the time of the Imam up until today. So those who claim that Shi'ism do not take the rules of authenticating the hadith seriously, they are not looking at history. We see from the time of the Imam, we brought examples up until today. Sayyid al-Kha'i was a recent marja of ours. So we see this effort of our ulama, of our scholars, is a constant effort to make sure that we use and keep the authentic narrations, and we don't use the fabricated ones, the ones that were not said by the A'imma alayhim as-salam. So we see this is the effort of our ulama. Now comes the main question. If this is the case and this is the efforts of our ulama, then why don't our ulama come and write a book? They call it Saheeh al-Kafi, Saheeh al-Kha'i, Saheeh al-Kulaini, Saheeh al-Saduq. Why didn't they write something like that? The same way that Bukhari and Muslim wrote Saheeh al-Bukhari, Saheeh Muslim, and now all the Sunni scholars can refer to Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari with comfort. They don't need to check if this narration is right, this narration is not right. So why is it the case that our ulama didn't do so? Here, before answering this, we need to understand what does Sahih mean in the first place. The word Sahih, when we say this narration is Sahih, usually we translate it as authentic. It's not really a good translation. I'll tell you why. When we look at a certain hadith, this is all Muslims by the way, not just you. When we look at a certain hadith, there is two elements that we care about. The first element is the chain of narrators. So the first narrator who narrated from the second one, who narrated from the third, up until the Prophet or the Imam. Are they all trustworthy or are they not? Did they live in times where it is possible for them to narrate from each other? Or no, they lived at a very different times where it's not possible for A to narrate from B. So these are questions to do with the chain of narration. We have other types of questions that we care about, which is the content of the narration itself. Sometimes I don't have a very strong chain, but the content, due to other indicators, and I will bring up examples, make me accept this narration. So when I say the narration is sahih, it means the chain of narrators is authentic. It doesn't necessarily mean that I can accept this narration as a whole. There are sahih narrations that we do not accept, and there are da'if narrations, weak narrations, that we accept. When we say sahih and weak, we mean the narrators. We don't mean the whole narration. This is important to keep in mind. Let me give you examples. Sometimes a narration, the narrators are all sahih, but the narration itself is clearly the Imam clearly said this out of taqiyya. There are indicators of taqiyya that our ulama try to pin. So a certain narration could be authentic in its narrators, but the content is clearly being said out of taqiyya. The Imam is trying to protect his believers. We have, for example, narrations where two individuals would come to the Imam and both of them would ask the Imam the exact same question. The Imam would give one answer to the first and a contradicting answer to the second. The companion of the Imam asked the Imam, "Oh my master, they both asked you the same question. You gave an answer to the first and a contradicting one to the other." The Imam told him, had I given the right answer to one of them, he would go back to his city and practice the same way that we do things, and he would have been killed in his city. So the Imam protected the life of this individual because it was a time of taqiyya, a time where the Shia are not in ease. They can't practice their practices at comfort. There was an eye on them. So we have many narrations that are said due to taqiyya. So I can have a sahih narration, a narration all of its narrators are authentic, but the content is taqiyya, so I can't deal with this narration. It's not useful for me. On the contrary, I may have a narration where the narrators may not be very authentic. Some of them may be missing. The link may be missing one or two names. But the content of the narration, due to other reasons, makes me accept this narration. I'll give you one example. The story of the son returning for Amir al-Mu'mineen. One of the miracles of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib is that the son would return for him. This story, we don't have one narration with all authentic narrators that gives us the story. However, we have many chains of narrators that give us this story. It is mentioned in about 30 different chains. Even though none of them is authentic, but if it is mentioned in 30 different chains, even if I don't trust the individuals, there is no way all 30 chains of those lines of narrators came together and decided to make a lie. It's impossible. So when that number of people narrate one incident, it's not 30 narrators, 30 chain of narrations. When that many people narrate one incident, we will know that this incident happened. So even if I don't have a chain that all of them are accepted narrators, I can take the event in of itself. So, as I said, Sahih means this. And even according to Sunni Hadith sciences, Sahih means that. Means correct chain of narrators. This is why sometimes there is a narration, there's a contradiction between a narration in Bukhari and Muslim. Sometimes this happens. So, of course, there are ways and different methods of how to deal with contradicting narrations within Sunni scholarhood and within Shia scholarhood. So the idea is this. When we say Saheeh Book, we mean a book that just have correct narrators for each hadith. Doesn't mean that we act upon every one of those ahadith. So when we say, why don't we have a Sahih book? If by Sahih book you mean a book that is authentic in accordance to the results that a certain alim has reached, a certain scholar has reached, then we have such books. In fact, Kafi is a result of that. For Shaykh al-Kulaini said, I tried my best to collect that which is authentic in the introduction of his book. Shaykh al-Saduq also, we can say the same thing. When he wrote Man La Yahdaru Faqih, he said, this book is not to collect all narrations. Rather, it's a book to collect the narrations upon which I can issue a fatwa upon. So same thing, according to Shaykh al-Saduq, Man La Yahdaru Faqih, we can call it Sahih al-Saduq, no issues. However, if we mean by Sahih a book that is unanimously agreed upon by all scholars, and this book becomes as authentic as the Holy Quran, then no. In fact, we are proud to say that we don't have such a book. Why is it the case? Because if we say we have such a book, then scholarship, the door of scholarship is closed. We don't need any more scholars. This will be our book and that's it. But there are different methodologies into accepting and rejecting a hadith. And the scholars, through the methodologies of a scholar, decide whether to act upon this hadith or reject that hadith. I'll give you two examples to show you how difficult it is. And it's not very simple. So we can't all rely upon the opinion of one scholar and say the Sahih of this scholar applies to all of us. I'll give you two examples. One example is an individual by the name of Saheeh ibn Ziyad. Saheeh ibn Ziyad narrated so many narrations mentioned in Al-Qurayn, in Al-Kafi. And as we said, Al-Kafi, Al-Quraini was very careful in the narrations that he narrates. It isn't the case that he would put any narration down. So when he takes narrations from Saheeh ibn Ziyad, it means Saheeh ibn Ziyad has some form of virtue, some form of authenticity that a Shaykh al-Quraini would take from him. However, there is an historical incident in regard to Saheeh ibn Ziyad that some of the scholars rejected the narrations by Saheeh. Why? Because back in the days, there were scholars in the city of Qom. And the city of Qom back in the days was a Shia city. Those scholars, to maintain the hadith, to protect the hadith, the narrations, the authentic narrations, any individual they doubt that his narrations are not authentic ones, they would kick him out of the city. They would tell him, you are not welcome in our city, go to another city. So usually when we find certain Ummi scholars in that era, they're usually authentic, no doubt. So Saheeh are amongst the individuals who were kicked out of the city of Qom. So now there is a debate amongst the scholars. Do we take the words of Saheeh because Shaykh al-Quraini narrates from him? Maybe the reason why the Qummis kicked him out of the city was not a very valid reason. Therefore we accept his narrations. Another opinion says no, the Qummis were very strict and their methodology was a strict one, and when they decided to kick him out, it was for a clear reason, because his narrations are different to the others. Therefore we do not take the narrations of Saheeh. Now, if let's say scholar A took the narrations of Saheeh, scholar B left the narrations of Saheeh ibn Ziyad, who should be called the Saheeh Book? Scholar A or scholar B? When we put one standardized book, that means everyone who comes after have to accept this opinion. But it is not the case. We say the door of scholarship is open. If you want, you go, study, and decide upon yourself. Do you take the words of Saheeh or do you not take the words of Saheeh? This is one example. Of course, there's more details into the discussion of Saheeh ibn Ziyad, but I just try to make it as simple as possible. The other discussion, this one will be an interesting one, is a discussion in regarding to Ibn Abi Umar, Muhammad ibn Abi Umar. He was a companion of Imam al-Kadhim, and some say even at Imam al-Rada as well. That time, as we said, was a time of taqiyya. If the Abbasids found out you are writing down narrations, they will either execute you, imprison you, they will make your life difficult. So Muhammad ibn Abi Umar, there was claims that he's writing down narrations. Therefore they took him to the prison. And by the way, Muhammad ibn Abi Umar is one of the very close companions. He's highly praised by the Imams. So think of him as a marja nowadays. He was taken to the prison. The narrations that he wrote down were in his house. His sister was scared, because if the authority would come and enter the house and see the books, she will be in trouble, he will be in trouble, the whole family will be in trouble. The sister of Muhammad ibn Abi Umar took his books and threw them in the well. So she destroyed all of his narrations to protect his life and her life and the family's life. And this shows us the difficult time they were in, by the way. It was not an easy time. Muhammad ibn Abi Umar, when he left the prison, he came back home. He said, "Where is my books?" He found out that his books were all destroyed. Of course, that was a strong hit against Muhammad ibn Abi Umar. So he sat down and decided to write down whatever he remembers and is sure that the Imam said this. So he does not have a direct contact the same way that he used to write down the words of the Imam. Rather, through his memory, whatever he remembers to be the words of the Imam, he would write it down. So now there is a discussion amongst our scholars. Some say he is a great man and he's highly praised by the Imams. He wouldn't write down a narration and purposefully would write something that the Imam didn't say. He wrote what he is sure of. Therefore, we accept the narrations of Muhammad ibn Abi Umar. Others said, with all due respect to Muhammad ibn Abi Umar, he's a great man, but we can't rely upon his memory. Therefore, we cannot accept his narrations. So we see again, there is a debate, and there are many narrations by him. So now, if we were to have one Saheeh book standardized, where everyone has to accept, then either all of us take the narrations of Muhammad ibn Abi Umar, or all of us deny it. Rather, we have the door of scholarship open. Go, do your research, and you can come to a conclusion. So this is why we don't have a Sahih book. Because it's not a standardized thing that all of us follow. The holy book that we have is the Quran. We don't have a holy book that we call it Sahih this. We don't give the book a holiness. We can check and see if we accept this narration or not. And this is the efforts that our ulama play. So you see, now it's much better that we don't actually have one standardized book. Why throw away narrations that could potentially be authentic? And why accept all narrations that some of them may be not authentic or not accepted? So this is the reason, and this is how we can see our ulama played a big role in protecting the narrations of Ahlul Bayt sallallahu alayhi. Of course, the reason why our ulama are very strict, because they want to reach to an Islamic ruling. They want to make sure the ruling that they give out is a ruling that is said by the Imam, which essentially is the ruling that Allah wants us to do. So this is why the methodology for fiqhi narrations is very strict. As for history, for example, no, we can be a bit more lenient. Why is it the case? Because history, even historians, when we want to note down the history and what happened, sometimes we can get certain things from the enemies. In fiqh, I cannot take things from the enemies. But in history, if the enemy said I'm a bad guy, or the enemy he said I'm a bad guy, I can write it down. Sometimes we can narrate we can know a certain incident happened, maybe not using those words. One example I'll give you, we can use for tonight's Musaydah. We all know that Al-Qasim salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi, when he went and wanted to seek permission from Imam Al-Hussain to go to the battlefield, Imam Al-Hussain would tell him, "Oh Qasim, my father asked me to take care of you, I can't leave you." Al-Qasim said, "My father left a will for me, that when you see your uncle Hussain left all alone on the plains of Karbala, then you have to aid him." So we see that this event, Imam al-Hasan leaving a will to Al-Qasim. Some historical accounts say that he wrote it in a paper. So in that moment, Qasim would open a paper and show the Imam that this is the will of my father. Other historical accounts show that no, Al-Qasim, he himself said, "My father told me to protect you or to aid you, or my uncle." So now, irrespective of if it was a paper or if Al-Qasim said it. We know for a fact that Imam al-Hassan gave a will to his son Hussain to protect, to his son Qasim to protect Imam al-Hussain. So again, this is the methodology of taking history is different to the methodology of taking the fiqh narrations. With that, I will end my English part of the lecture and move it to the Arabic after Salat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.